the time to listen to our today's session at these difficult conditions. My name is Valeria Mosganova. I'm the head of the real estate department of Business FM radio station and the moderator of today's meeting. And I would ask you to switch off the sound on your mobile phones. I understand that it's very difficult to focus. Actually, I should ask everyone to take off their clothes and take a comfortable position, but let's just limit ourselves by switching off the sound of the mobile phones. A few words of introduction before we get back to the subject of our meeting. I think almost everyone in this room knows that within the limits of the old Moscow there are industrial zones that were subject to reorganization, and they took up 17% of the territory. It's a huge number, but it's really close to the situation in other industrially developed cities. The issue of industrial zones, it's not just the problem of Moscow. And today, according to statistics, every fourth new building built in Moscow is built on the territory of former industrial zones. So we've started this process. You are all aware, I guess, how much time it took for the Moscow government what to do with respect of those industrial zones. Should they preserve them or modernize them, or maybe they should get all the production sites away from Moscow and build the housing here? There were two opinions, but right now those two opinions coexist quite well. There are some industrial zones which will still be industrial. They will be transformed into technical parks or inner policies, whatever you call them, but in actual essence they will still be industrial. They will still have an industrial function, perhaps a little of an office function and so on, but the other part will be reorganized. And we are going to talk today about this part, which is subject to serious reorganization. And I introduce the participants of our meeting. Konstantin Timofeyev, Moscow Invest Chairman, Larissa Madem, the main architect of the Netherlands, Sergei Georgievsky, CEO of the Center Agency, Alona Derabina, General Director of Domstroy Invest, and Ivan Romanov. I'm sorry, I have forgotten your precise title. Can you call it LSR Group? And your title is Manager. The shorter the title is, the more significance it has. Just President. Nothing to add. Just Manager, President, nothing to add. Okay, Konstantin, the first floor goes to you. What's happening in the industrial zone segment? Are we going in the right direction? Or maybe something is preventing us from going in that direction, or maybe actually we are following the wrong path and we should turn around immediately and choose a different direction. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. I welcome everyone here. It's really very cozy here today. It's a new center here, which is recently built. I hope it will become even cozier here. And Valeria started by saying where we are moving to. Everyone is moving where he or she wants to. And the city, well, we listened to Sergei Simonovich today, and we are moving towards reconstruction of industrial zones. And as part of complex development, that's maybe how we should do it. And this territory has remained to be a huge reserve, which was not built chaotically. And there's also the central railway ring, which connects these territories, and it's a great thing. And I believe that many urban development programs should be working together. The renovation program, for example, has become a joint one with the program of developing industrial communities and zones. The other programs are becoming more popular and more successful in cooperation with each other. And I will give you a few examples. This year, we had a committee of land commission, which was chaired by the mayor. And for example, the PIC group of companies, which is represented here today, has launched a new program of urban development on a surface of 1.5 million square meters. And there was a program of renovation, and a big area will be dedicated to this program. There was also a decision by the Land Commission to dedicate 1,000 square meters for a renovation program. And this renovation will cover several dozens of thousands of square meters. There's another program centering around the Volner Street, about 150,000 square meters. That's also part of the renovation program. And the investor will be provided about 10,000 square meters for these purposes. Gatskaya Ulica 47 and 49, also a lot of new construction there. I will name here, well, I have named a few programs, and decisions have been taken on those facilities. And as I mentioned, the relevant federal law, we believe that this is an additional advantage because these lands are not limited by having to build a single facility. If there is a single plan, there is no rule which would say a single facility, a single builder, a single developer. Actually, you can build several facilities here, and you can get different permissions. That's another advantage. Today, we would like to have more Q&As. I have a report for 12 pages here. That's just a list of examples, and I would be happy to take your questions. As for those projects, we will support them with pleasure. Even more so since those investors are members of the Club of Investors, and we hope that the new housing will be cozy and comfortable, and we will support everyone along these lines. Please raise your hands. Who has downloaded the application of the Moscow Urban Forum? Many of you. And there you have a survey, a questionnaire, which is dedicated to the renovation of former industrial territories. Let's enter this application. There's a question there: how should the former industrial zones develop? This is a very tough wording because perhaps there are many options. But what would be the optimal answer from your point of view? Please enter this application and enter the most suitable answer. Thank you very much. Floris, and I have a question to you. You have consulted both private and public entities for a lot of time, and I'm sure you know how to make one entity, one unit, a completely different one. And this is the essence of redevelopment we are talking about. How to create something new which would be valuable for the city and its dwellers. And not hypothetically speaking, it should be something concrete. It should be something necessary, needed by the modern city. Can you share your practices, please?
Maybe the other ones. Yeah. Okay. Can I have my presentation for that? Okay. I'll try to explain you the way how we work in the Netherlands and also in some other countries next to us with redevelopment of industrial zones. If I can have the next one, please. Is that possible? The next slide? Yeah.
Maybe kicker.
Perfect. Yeah, so I think the last generation went through a really interesting period where the identity of our culture, which was very much related to the production, became a culture with an identity related to consumption, which has an enormous impact on the way we live, the way we build, and also the way we redevelop our cities. And of course, our generation builds more than all the other generations before us combined. And if we look at the development worldwide of urban territory, you can say that they all start to look alike. And that is a question we ask ourselves as designers, as a culture. What does it mean? And of course, often you have to rebuild and to add territory to your cities. But the interesting thing is that there is an other way, and that is indeed in redevelopment and in transformation. And if we look at our existing historical city centers, like for instance this one of Amsterdam, and we always appreciate these old city centers, but we have to realize that they are all part of an ongoing transformation and densification process. So the fact that we like our inner cities is because generation after generation it has been reworked. And I want to show you two examples of projects as an architect I was involved in personally, where it was about redeveloping former industrial areas. This one is in Germany, in Essen, in the industrial Ruhrgebiet, 100-hectare territory. And when the mines, this is a coal mine industry, when the mines closed down in 1985, the idea was to demolish these buildings. But then in the Ruhrgebiet in Germany, they started to realize if they would demolish all their industrial heritage, somehow they would lose an identity they also cherish. So we were asked to work on this property and to propose a master plan in which it could be developed in another way, reusing the buildings, reusing the site. So we made a master plan where we actually not only included the existing buildings, but also part of the existing infrastructure. And by doing so, we revealed the beauty and the potential of the area, which in the end, we succeeded to convince UNESCO to make the site a World Heritage project. So instead of demolishing, destroying the entire site, it became a World Heritage project. And you can do that by adding the power of design. Have good architects working on it. And for instance, one of the buildings we turned into a museum where we said we add some visible elements of our generation, but most of the structures you can reuse. And of course, all part of this transition from production to consumption, different identities, of course. A second project I quickly want to show you is a project I did in this Belgium city of Ghent. As you can see, next to the historical center, a former harbor area, abandoned, and also a perfect site to redevelop. The typical conditions in these areas, the bankruptcy of the companies there, but a site with a huge potential. And again, what we did is not the tabula rasa, erasing whatever is there, but in the contrary, we made a very precise analysis of all the existing elements. And we valued them, and basically the plan we made was connecting the area to the inner city, but then all the valuable heritage elements that we found, we integrated in a kind of open zones. So we first designed the public territory, the park zones. In the park zones, we maintain the old identity of the harbor areas with all these elements. And by doing that, we could develop an open structure for redevelopment with new housing projects. So basically what I try to show with these two examples is that if you start to redevelop industrial areas, it's not about erasing, it's not about tabula rasa. I use always this example. It's a Japanese technique of repairing broken ceramics. And the idea is not to repair it invisible, but actually make the repair the quality. And I think this is how we can deal with industrial zones. That what our generation adds can be very precisely designed. And by doing that, all of a sudden, the existing context gets a new value. Thank you.
Я все-таки сразу, не могу.
I have to ask you at once. Preserving the earlier values is great, but are they always worth preserving? How often have you faced the need to really demolish everything what existed there and to create something which is really brand new? Maybe those cases are rare, or maybe at every former industrial zone, you always have to preserve something, maybe a concrete building or a specific spirit of this place.
It's definitely true that you should not always maintain all buildings. That is clear. For many buildings, demolishing is the best answer, also to make way for new buildings. But when I'm saying not tabula rasa, I'm saying do not erase everything. There are always elements you can reuse that create an identity. And if it's not the buildings itself, then often it's the urban structure. And if you talk about sustainable urbanism, it's also reusing which is already there. And I like the idea that what our generation adds works with what the other generation left. And it often is just better thinking and better designing in order to make and to recreate value for the elements we find. And I think working with that adds quality, adds identity. And as I showed in the example of Essen, all of a sudden people see it as a valuable heritage, which then also will increase property value in these sites. But indeed, often demolishing is a part of the answer. Yeah.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. You've created a great bridge connecting us to the next presentation by Mr. Georgievsky, who is really focused on industrial zones. Sergey, I know that you have just completed a big survey on industrial zones. Please share the conclusions that you arrived at in your study. Thank you very much. I will try to answer with the part of my brain which hasn't yet melted away. Indeed, a year before the start of this work, we announced about this project. This is a non-commercial study which is available for everyone. And we've tried to bring together the best practices from all over the world and classify the zones that we have in Moscow and other cities to understand how to work with them. We did not work on this study alone. We worked with a whole pool of experts from Moscow, from the Agentburo Ostozhenka. We worked with Marina Krustalova and so on. So the object of our study is industrial zones. It's 17% of the city. And many people understand that this is the last resource to reuse certain shortages and start developing the city further.
Our research showed that in many districts, the presence or the absence of industry in an area has a direct impact on many things and is influenced by many things, such as transparency of the environment, safety, cost of real estate, and how expensive it is to live in it. Many districts faced the challenge of the lack of green spaces, multifunctional public spaces. All of that could be compensated if we consider the industrial heritage of Moscow as a systemic resource. And there should be a whole strategy, not individual projects, and that would allow to resolve many strategic issues for many years ahead. Moscow is in the trend. The whole world is rethinking today the industrial areas in the city. In our city, they are located in the center as well as on the periphery, and they can resolve various tasks. If you have a look at the basic statistics, only 52% of the industrial areas are functioning according to their initial purpose. We tried to divide these territories into 4 types. Territories that allow to reach high productivity, territories who are mostly dedicated for housing, for business areas, for public or environmental functions, and we wanted to develop a universal methodology about how to work with such territories. What's interesting is that out of 48 industrial sites that are to be reorganized according to the general master plan, in 24 of these areas there are already historical and cultural heritage monuments that were identified. If we have a broader look, we found 70 other sites, each of which could be a new monument. And we forget that industrial sites were designed by the best architectures, by the best urban developers. They used the most prominent technologies and rare as well as innovative and aesthetical architecture that could bring some identity to the urban districts that don't have any identity today. That would create new points of attraction, and they would allow Moscow to get much more cultural spaces and make us more aware of that as citizens. There is industrial potential almost everywhere. However, there are some complicated examples. We can break them down into sites that require conservation and adaptation, and the sites that require demolishment. Not all of these sites have unique planning structure, but all of them can be used. Speaking about the Moscow city center, we could link the city fabric. We could integrate various industrial sites so that they are flawlessly included into the fabric of the city, and thus we will have the polycentric city. The center will not be focused in the actual center, but instead there will be many centers that will be new attraction points all around the city. The city will thus turn into an agglomeration. In our research, we offered a methodology of development of the reorganized industrial areas. We showed all the possible scenarios for them, and we calculated the economical model for these territories, how they could work in any type of redevelopment, and taking into account all the factors. This methodology is open, and the purpose of my speech today is to make it as available as possible. We offered this research both for the developers and the city. It allows to see the actual industrial sites in the view of economics, politics, culture, and other aspects. And I see that many of you have this map. During the Moscow Urban Forum, there is a special project that allows you to see the territories that have already been reorganized and have already demonstrated their potential or are about to demonstrate it. You can go there, you can walk there, and you can see by your own eyes and appreciate the treasure that Moscow possesses as one of the biggest cities in the world. Thank you very much. It was very good. I just have one question. Who has to be the first to work on that? Developers or urban government, the city government? Maybe you. This issue can be resolved only through collective effort. This is also part of methodology. The state, the developer, and the community that influences can join and work on terms of reference for the designers and go through all the process stages together. What's crucial is that we all have the stereotype that it's easier to demolish and build everything from scratch later. But actually, we can prove that quite often we can preserve part of the legacy for the contemporary use of these projects. This will be much more beneficial than to demolish and to build from scratch. Okay, that's clear. Thank you. We will ask the developers, since we do have some developers. Konstantin, before giving the floor to developers, I'd like to ask you, how do you think? What's your experience, your practice, or your observation? What do they show? What are the main issues that the developers are facing today when working in industrial areas? If you're speaking about my experience, you don't have any developer experience, I understand that. Well, my experience suggests that the crucial issues are the internal issues of the developers themselves, because 70% of success is the company management. I think that many colleagues will agree with me. We see that today there are several leaders on the market. They are not leaders because they receive some support or because they have the best areas. They are leaders because they have strong managers, shareholders, teams, and a group of designers who create comfortable environment. They are not just jumping between projects. They have a consistent strategy, and there are a lot of new sites in the city, including on the free market, including with all the necessary permits. Large investors are selling them, and we have a bank of projects. The Association of Investors provides their assistance. So I don't think that there are issues with regulation or the change of permits. Sometimes these administrative things are expensive, sometimes not, but we are all in the same conditions. Alena, could you please join our conversation? Donstroy is the company you represent. That's a company who has wide practical experience of working in the industrial area. This syrup and emollet project is yours. So is there any difference between redeveloping an industrial area or working in a new area? Or are there some particularities of working in former industrial sites that require some experience and a specific approach? Speaking after Sergey, I feel as a vandal, but I'll try to give you a picture. So, first, the subject of our discussion, city and developers, or the redevelopment of industrial areas, as though we were in opposition with the cities. It's not like that. It's beneficial for both the city and the developer, and the ultimate beneficiary is the resident, because he gets a new quality of life. Regarding whether things are complicated or not, or beneficial or not, I think it would be a dream to find an opportunity to complement your project portfolio by a former industrial site, because the project portfolio is working for 10 to 15 years to come, and I think that for any developer that is something that would be quite desirable. Regarding the possibilities of individual building, such opportunities are limited in Moscow, as it has been mentioned. There are 15% of territory within the old Moscow, and out of 3 million square meters that we're building, 2.5 million are on the former industrial sites. On the one hand, there is a number of challenges there that we need to tackle. First of all, it's about the relation between the current owners. It's about having a new transport network on this territory, a new network of engineering. It's all about complicated relations. Nevertheless, there are some advantages of this area. Historically, in the age of industrializations, all the industrial sites were built on areas that had very logical and simple transport accessibility. For example, we have a site located on the Moscow River embankment. That's a site of our dreams. Regarding the Serp-Imolot project, it is located between two main lines. The Enthusiast Avenue that unfortunately is in traffic jams. The city is, by the way, doing all it's possible to decongest it, and we also have another site which is in a better location, but all of the sites are located within 5 to 6 kilometers from Kremlin. So it's very good that we have such former industrial sites in Moscow. Why I think it's beneficial for the developer, the city, and the end user. Let's start with the end user, because we are all socially responsible and team-oriented. That's the particularity of the current society. Comprehensive approach allows to rethink and prevent the diseases of the urban environment that the cities suffered from over the last 50 years. First of all, it's the standardized life. We have for many years lived in standardized buildings, standardized schools and so on. Everyone had all the same environment. It was very standardized, and today the city and the developer community is using the trend on individuality. There is a possibility to invite outstanding, talented architects, both Russian and international ones, to work with such former industrial sites. And for each such site, a unique design code is created. As a result, the city gets very bright, new neighborhoods for life, for work, for citizens, for tourists, and for everyone who is interested. The second disease of the urban environment is the lack of housing and the bad quality of housing. The whole construction industry worked to ensure that every family has an apartment, no matter what the quality is. As a result, there is a large share of population who are living in badly planned apartments with small kitchens, small bedrooms, and so on. That goal was the priority, but still we are lagging behind in terms of housing. For example, in Europe there are 35 square meters per resident. In the US it's 70 square meters, but even in China it is 28 meters per person, and at Moscow it's 20 meters per person. So I hope that the redevelopment of former industrial sites will help us to resolve this issue and improve the experience of many families. The renovation program by the government will lead to more residents having better housing conditions. The third disease of the urban environment are dull courtyards and empty areas. The particularity of our districts was that there was no life around houses. There were some remote parks and animated squares and environments. But today we can change the situation. Today we can improve the situation without prejudice to the commercial interests of the developers. For example, we have the project Symbol Heart of Capital. More than 40% of the territory are dedicated to landscaping. As a result, these projects are commercially successful, and truly comfortable conditions for living for residents were created. Okay, Alyona, can I please interrupt you here? I completely agree with you, but you, as a developer, don't you have any issues when working on former industrial sites? Of course, we do have such issues. I can repeat that. First, that's a big number of proprietors on any industrial sites. That's the historical particularity. In an attempt to survive, factories needed to sell parts of their property, and they sold sometimes premises, parts of railroads, and these initial proprietors were changed, and we need to take that into account when developing the design code and the spatial development projects. So the first issue is a very costly, long and sophisticated work with the proprietors of the industrial areas. The second issue, as I think, that's the creation of the new transport network and the new engineering networks. When we are speaking about individual buildings, if the developer manages to have a good collaboration with a good architect, that will account for 60% of success of the future project. I'm looking at Yuli, who is facing me, and I recall one of our projects that we made together. And there, indeed, the share of the architect in the success of the project is huge. And a talented architect will not be sufficient. It's not the only parameter necessary to redevelop a former industrial site. However, there are no tasks that we cannot tackle. In Moscow, we have very strong urban planning institutes. We have the opportunity to get consultations from foreign experts. We are working, for example, with 2 London-based English companies, Link Design, UG London. So the whole world is open to dialogue. It's open to share their skills and experience. But I will try to explain my stance. Development is not the area where we can witness revolutionary innovations that would make a whole turnaround in the construction area. Unfortunately, development is an area of small improvements. And if you come early to work, if you come there every day and work a lot, you can really do quality projects, both when it comes to individual buildings and former industrial sites. Thank you, Aliona. Konstantin, now a question to you. The issue mentioned by Aliona is known to everyone. That's the big number of proprietors on one site. How do you think, how acute is this issue today? And are there any radical ways to resolve this? Yes, on the one hand, it is an issue indeed. On the other hand, perhaps not. I'll try to explain that. There is an area where there are several proprietors, 1, 2, or 3. How to find out who is more important? A large investor will say, I am. Another proprietor will say, I am. Some of them want to build residential buildings, other wants to make a commercial center, and the third one is saying, I want industrial production on these sites. So there are some draft laws on the comprehensive territorial development. These drafts are now on an initial stage, but it's not yet ready because we need negotiations. Only through negotiations with the proprietors can we resolve that, or by buying out the area.
There are examples when there's just 1 or 2 owners who have a business and they like it, they are okay with it, and sometimes the owners are not even Russians, but we welcome everyone in the city, but we still would like to see development. And I agree with Alona, this is one case when the law allows it on the one case, but on the other hand it prevents it. Of course, private property should be protected by law, but One option is a replanning of the territory by the city, and the city will use economic incentives to stimulate the owner to build something there. I believe that the research carried out by the Central Agency will give us assistance. Ivan, I would ask you to switch your mic on and join our dialogue. What's the biggest project? Correct me if I'm wrong, but perhaps the largest project for industrial zone reorganization is the ZIL project done by LSR. Alona said that it's in the industrial zones that you can create a new, comfortable, multi-functional and diverse environment and resolve the issues which were not previously solved. We can set things right. So what's your experience? What's your practice? What have you been facing when working on the project? Thank you. As the last of the speakers, I have the honorable right and obligation to sum up those trends. Of course, I will talk about our project, but how do I see the motivation for the developers, for the city, to reorganize those industrial zones? It says following: not only Moscow, but also other megacities of the world are past this industrial era. Now they are in the digital era, when a lot of production becomes more efficient, a lot of production is moved outside megacities, and now we need new facilities. New solutions are required, and we have to reorganize those industrial zones. We have to change them, redevelop them, and give them new functions. And the experience of the successful redevelopment is very large all over the world. I can tell you about a lot of cases from the global practice. The important thing is not those cases as such, but the features which make them successful. Along with projects like the Berlin Airport Tempelhof, where a huge landscape bank was created. That's one function changed by another function. But the most successful are the projects where instead of one function we have multifunctional use. And the fact that other important needs of people are met here, such as people have more time in terms of access to new facilities for vacation culture, and this gives an additional value to those mega cities, to those sites. This is how those industrial zones are changed and become multifunctional. There's another trend which I could single out in those projects. As a rule, to implement those projects, some architect gurus are invited, and people try to use the most advanced practices. We can talk a lot about particular cases. For example, city life, or that there's a Hafen City, a major European project. A lot of gurus of the industry were involved in those projects, and there are a lot of architect stars who participated in the project in Buenos Aires, including, for example, Philip Foster. And thanks to this interesting team, there are some extraordinary projects which are really interesting, which are new hallmarks of the city's architecture. They are a new page in the architecture. By generalizing all those trends, we have started the Zilart project. Alona said a lot about the challenges that we were facing, that developers are facing when they reorganize industrial zones. And I would like to mention the opportunities as well. As a rule, these zones are big spaces, big territories. Our Zilart is the second largest project after the London redevelopment project in terms of territory. And this gives us great opportunities. We can place facilities of different functions and make a multifunctional environment, but we can also create a really cozy environment which is not there in the city yet. As a rule, when implementing those projects, we are making a new step in city planning. That's a new step forward. The use of new practices which were previously used only in small projects. Our group, over its 25 years of experience, has implemented about a dozen and a half of large redevelopment projects. That includes very interesting projects such as reorganizing some former milk factories. We have a lot of experience shifting some industrial sites outside the city and creating new districts. It was also the facilities for metal processing, a lot of different facilities and sites. After analyzing these practices, we have found some great approaches, and Zilart, as one of the greatest European projects, is also a mega project which is unprecedented in Moscow. And after finishing it, we will have new opportunities to compare a city district created from scratch with a district which has been replanned and rebuilt for years and even decades, where there are facilities which were still needed and there were facilities which were no longer required, which were replaced by the new facilities. Ivan, now that we have to finish this discussion soon, I have the following question. What are the three main characteristics which single out Zilart compared to all other projects from your point of view? This size, that's a mega project indeed. Number two, the team of architects. There are 30 of them now. 30 architects, because we have 41 facilities and we have 30 different architects for those 41 sites, and they are working on creating this architectural image. And number three, and of course these are the recreational areas, the nature sites, which are created ahead of other work. And city dwellers can already start visiting park, which we built together with Jerry Van Eyck, landscape designer, which is known all over the world. Great. For those who haven't been to Zilart yet, please go there and have a look around. It's very nice, very interesting. And a short question, if I may. Zilart, where did you get this word from? That's the result of the whole team's imagination. We wanted to keep the name of this territory in our new name. And of course, there's also the main component that we brought into this project, art, because we made development an art. And we created a unique structure, which I hope will in the future become a monument of architecture. So you are still using the word ZIL. Now that we have industrial zones, maybe we should support the car industry a bit on this territory. You know, we gave so much effort and time to preserving history. For example, our main boulevard is the Vesnins brothers boulevards. They are the founders of architecture. They are great representatives of the Russian vanguard. And they are the architects who were among the first to go to this territory and to design the first buildings which were built on the territory of the plaza of the brothers Legushinskis. That was a kind of provocation. We didn't even go to that museum before that, and you are all for preserving our industry. We are saying, we're using some high-flown words about keeping the environment, but also there's the money of financing. Can you say a few words? Is it beneficial to the developer, or are you just working for the image? Of course this is beneficial. Don't listen to our moaning. This is our national trait. Taking all this amount of investment, about 65% of our investment is spent on designing and construction. Another 20% is what the city gets from us in terms of various payments, taxes and so on. And they can develop some social sectors thanks to those taxes. We also have some engineering expenses, social expenses. That's what we are investing in the same land while understanding what we will get back from it. Of course, this is beneficial, this is lucrative. It's not really a great margin, but it still brings profit to the developer. Great. We can conclude here. We also have Lubov Tsvetkova. And Lubov, I will ask you to give a summary of what has been said, because you are asked about all those issues by the members of your association and others. Are we discussing the right things? Are these problems really relevant? Of course, everything that was mentioned by the developers today is really very relevant and topical. I would also like to mention one thing that is a really new innovation. We have a new law for about 2 years, and it's used on 47 territories, the so-called cut zones. So what is it, the cut zone? That's Law 373. We had several objectives. One objective is to introduce some minor users in this mechanism for the urban building initiative, so that our minor users take part in this redevelopment without posing obstacles to it. It's too early to say whether this law is efficient. We still haven't received any serious outcomes, but actually this law 373 has been used in a very creative way by the local powers. In Moscow, this law is always governed and regulated by the Moscow authorities, and there are some local residents who live in those skirts, and they are not aware that something can be done. We believe that the Moscow government approach is the logical one, and it is up to the spirit of this law, but it's difficult to understand how this law works, because we've just started. We also have 60 hectares in one project. There are a lot of owners, and this is all one zone. I can't tell you that the developers the writers of those law did not take advice from the users, but there are so many users, so many right owners that you can't really speak to all of them. And thank God we were heard in the industry department. We reduced the zone to 20 hectares to 5 owners with whom we can have a dialogue. But we succeeded in this because that we had been working with the owner of the Mosselmarsh territory for 2 years. And that's a situation when the owner of an industrial zone understands that he needs to do something with this territory. And it's 3 years before you start to understand it. So if you just enter this cut zone, you should understand that it's not at once that people will come to you. Right now, there's just one condition. That is the Department of Industry of the city of Moscow really loves technoparks. Unfortunately, our developers cannot build those technoparks and can't really operate them. There are very few successful technoparks. Otherwise, it's okay. We've always created a road map for implementing those CAD projects. But it's also clear that for now we don't have the results. We are in the beginning of the way, but we already understand the issues we are facing. Industrial zones are usually covered by the ban for construction. That means that regardless of the density of this zone, we still have some obstacles. People always want to construct something, to build something, and no one will actually be able to build a sports center there, for example. Furthermore, there can be a lot of different users. Well, a lot of different owners. Unfortunately, I was not able to say most things that I was planning to say. Just one thing to add. What does the city need? The city needs the territories to develop. The developers need to gain money. This code mechanism that we are working on really helps it. It's not perfect, but it's already a mechanism. So it will help industrial zones to grow and develop. And now we have the voting results. The voting was not very active, but there are two interesting modes. The zone should remain industrial, 0 votes. And the zones listened to Kudrin very well, probably. Zones should become creative clusters, more than half of the votes, 57%. The zones should become creative clusters and not residential or industrial zones and not even parks. Maybe you mentioned New Moscow. Well, that's very probable. So will we make them creative? It might be a joke or might be not, but the most expensive land is on the territory of the old Moscow. As for the industry and other real estate, it doesn't bring that amount of profit. And what has been mentioned is probably beyond the 3rd Moscow Road ring. And we should only talk about some residential projects. This year also showed that retail is another objective that we may target. The industry itself, additional jobs, that's beyond the 3rd road ring. This is where we should finish our discussion. Thank you very much to everyone who's been here. Please switch on the sound of your mobile phones. Thank you very much, dear speakers. Despite this warm atmosphere, they found the strength to share impressions about industrial zones. Good luck and have a great